Hello, friends. How are you this morning? Welcome, welcome. Hello, gang. Good morning, all. Good morning, good morning. How are you, friends? Good morning. Good to see you. Hello, hello. Good morning, everybody. How are you? Hey, Sharon, good morning to you. Great to see you. Hope you're well. John, good morning to you. Great to see you. Glad you're here. Deb Votrin, everybody. Hi, Deb. Glad you're doing well. Yvette, good morning to you. Donna, glad you're here. I hope things are well. I hope Maine is good and beautiful these days. Good morning, everybody. All right. So we'll one or two more folks coming along and we'll get going. Good morning, everybody. How are you? All right. Fannie Faye Davis, everybody. Good to see you. So glad you're here. Thank you. It is a joy. Oh, I'm glad you're good. Good, good, good. Good to know. All right. Good morning, everybody. It is the 21st day of September at 11:11, and I am glad you're here. I'm glad we are back for another week and another opportunity to gather, whether here live or whether with or whether that you'll come along a little later and catch all that we'll discuss. But today in Fall River is election day. Fall River is electing a new mayor, and if you might know that the mayoral office has been an interesting one over these past years. If you haven't been tied into it. But the former mayor actually is just due to be sentenced yesterday or today for some abuses of office, and so the city has taken everyone in the city has taken really seriously, who the leadership has been, and Mayor Coogan has stepped in over these last months and led the city through COVID and been on the scene. And he has been challenged by a young man, by a city councilman by the name of Cliff Ponte. And now there's a couple other folks on the ballot, and I don't really know a lot about them because really, I think for most people that have been watching the race, it has been really centered around Mayor Coogan and this challenger, Cliff Ponte. So this is, I bring you up to speed about what's happening at Election Day here in Fall River, about who is going to hold the mayor's office next. Now, why do we care? Not that we shouldn't, that we don't care about but why am I talking about this in what is often a stream that is considered a spiritual, or in which we are kind of dealing with things of faith here, me as pastor, is it so important who Caesar is in our world, so I want to talk about that a little bit today. I actually want to talk about Election Day and just this whole notion of Election Day in our culture and in our world as a part of our tradition of being congregational Christians, and what that has meant over time, and what and where do we get this stuff in the first place? So always a good place to start, certainly for us followers of Jesus, is that we start with Bible. And Paul writes a letter to Timothy. Now, Timothy is one of his disciples, and he's a follower of Jesus, but he's also kind of a younger guy that Paul is kind of bringing along. He's kind of giving him instruction. Now, Timothy goes on to do really cool stuff all on his own, but this is a letter the letters to Timothy are really letters of instruction, that you have this kind of more senior Christian follower of Jesus kind of sending to this younger follower of Christ. And so he says, and Paul clearly cares greatly for Timothy and how he might move through the world. And in it, he says this in his first letter, in the second chapter. So it's right out of the gate about how are we to move through this world? How are we to move through a world that, remember, in the first century, in this time when Paul is around and trying to figure out what it means to follow this Jesus guy, the authorities are actively hostile to the Christians. The Christians are creating all kinds of trouble for the Roman world in terms of how they work. And so part of the question is, how do we engage in this? How do we engage in this larger civic life, this political life that's going on around us? And and Paul writes this, and it's well quoted, but I think it is a worthy starting place. He says this: I exhort, therefore, that first of all, supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all people, for kings and for all those who are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. Now, this has been twisted around over many years, like most scripture has, to kind of, somebody wants to make a point or wants to sharpen an axe. They certainly have used this over time to do so. But to hear what this says, pray for our leaders, pray for those in authority, so that we might lead quiet and peaceable lives in godliness and honesty. What they're saying is that the political life and the political sphere, and those for whom have the capacity to legally do violence to the world, like pick you up off the street and put you in jail, that have the ability to put you to death, may have the ability to tax you, that have the ability, that these authorities in the world, that we should pray for them, that they be peaceable, that they be good authorities, that they be so that we all in the peaceable kingdom might lead quiet and peaceable lives in godliness and honesty, so that we might not end up in a world where we've got to engage in some skullduggery, where we have to somehow work our way to be honest. That we might pray for our leaders so that we don't have to live like, say the church in China, where they have to go underground and they have secret meetings and they're constantly on guard lest the authorities come and arrest them and drag them away. This is really it's an interesting thing because it's almost a variation on praying for our enemies in a way, but simply that those that govern may do so in a so that quiet and peaceable life and godliness and honesty might be able to be lived out, because sometimes it's really hard, and sometimes Christianity and Christians have found it to be really hard. Now, which kind of leads me to this point of like today's election day in Fall River. We're going to that Fall River is going to elect itself a new mayor. It's going to that either Mayor Coogan will stay in office and come for and serve for another term, or very likely. His challenger, Cliff Ponte, will take the office. It'll be one of those two. So we can expect. So, who thought this was a good idea in the first place? Like, how did we get to this idea that voting, like that you have a vote and I have a vote, and that all the people of this city have a vote, and that the majority of those people should make a decision about the fact that maybe that's a good idea, that person is the best in term to hold this office. How did we ever get to that point as a society and as a world? What is often said of democracies as kind of a cool collection of them, as kind of a cool critique, is that no people who have ever kind of come to rule themselves as in a democratic way has gone backwards, which I think is always an interesting testament and always an interesting thing to say. Like, if we want to see the arc of where the world is going, if we want to see the arc of where things are being led, maybe by the Lord's providence, part of it is that we should see that kind of what is enduring. That nobody has gone back to a time of monarchs. That hasn't been done once in all of creation, like that we know of. That we haven't seen anybody who said, you know what, this whole voting thing, or this whole gathering and having everybody have a voice thing, and then deciding, to promote that person as leader that is willing to stand for the wider polis, the wider civic life, and imbue authority in that person to do so. Nobody on the planet has ever gone backwards and say, you know what, let's just give it to the strongest guy. Let's just give it to the biggest guy. Let's just give it to the one for whom God ordains, or for whom that once people, it seemingly seems, I love that phrase. It seemingly seems that any group of people who, once they have an opportunity to organize themselves in such a way, have continued to do so. Now, where does that all come from? Now, my contention is, this is my true contention, and we can fight about it, but my true contention is that this comes actually from our congregational forefathers and foremothers. This notion, because we have to look at what they were about, that this simple notion, but this powerful notion, that you and I are sovereign before God. Remember how things were organized prior to that. Now, again, there have been democracies before that. In Venice, there was of the 40 families democracy. They kind of got together and voted for the mayor of Venice. The 40 families did. In ancient Rome, you have some democratic experience. In ancient Greece, you have some democratic experiences. but none of them are based out of this, out of, but they're all this really nascent ideas of, and if you read about them, they don't really look like what we understand, of this sense of giving voice to a person, and giving voice to a person's volition and the imbuing of authority into another person. They don't look like that. They look like oligopolies largely. That's kind of what they look like, is the people who are landed with the most money, with the most power, get together and decide who's going to run things. Now, we can argue about whether even that's going on now. Like, and there's certainly people who make the contention that that's what's going on in all places. But here we are in Fall River, and here we are with Mayor Coogan and Cliff Ponte fighting it out, and it's been quite an election season, really. If you've been following any of it, it's actually pretty fascinating. That some of the allegations against the sitting mayor, some of the allegations against Cliff Ponte and the way that he's conducted his campaign, it's really actually pretty good political theater if you want to be honest. And all of this we come back to, I think, in particularly in the American experiment in which this first started 400 years ago, and then with really nothing more than what still we is harkened back to as the Mayflower Compact, where everybody got together and said, you know what, all right, I'm going to go with this, and they put their names to it. I'm going to vote for this. Where does this idea of voting come from? And it comes from the simple fact that a world unchained from a sovereignty of a monarch, or a sovereignty of another individual, or a sovereignty of a priest, to stand between that you truly are not sovereign before God, comes to this point where where it gives way to the belief and the notion that you are sovereign before God. That is you and Jesus working this thing out. And all of these other apparatuses in between, these authorities and the principalities and the authorities that are in between, not that they are not ordained, and not that they do not have divine order to them. There is a divine order, and this is the critical thing. I've gone back and forth with whether there's an anarchist or not, and over time, like I've had all kinds of different ideas about governance. But what I will suggest to you is that regardless of where you fall on that spectrum, on how you understand that, on how you fall on any of that, the foundational idea of voting is this foundational idea that your sovereignty both as a child of God made in the image of God, and your voice as a person has validity with every other voice in the world, with every other soul in the world, with every other person in the world. And as we have seen voting rights unfold, that's what we've seen. Yes, it often started with everywhere with different ideas about voting, but the more and more it ends up is the more and more people are enfranchised, the more and more women, the women can notion of their access to the ballot box. We can talk about that now. We can talk about what we do with that, but I want to just stay with this because I think this is the most important thing about Election Day to me. Is not necessarily the person who's going to end up in the office. Like that doesn't, but it is. But to understand, to remind ourselves that Election Day is actually a day of celebration of our sovereignty before the true sovereign. This notion, as our early Congregationalists understood it, that there is no king but Christ, that there is no, and yet there are principalities, and there are those people that need to administer things. We can't that things do need administration. Things do need a hierarchy. We are parts of hierarchies. That no one's. I'm not suggesting that, but I am suggesting that the whole idea of voting, society gives voice to all peoples. it's founded out of that idea. It's founded out of that belief. It's founded out of the notion that finds its home in the Constitution. The notion that worked itself out for 200 years. Understand, it worked itself out for 150 years, if you want to say, 1620 to 1775, that it worked itself out for 150 years on the American continent. This notion that I have the Bible, I have Jesus the Christ, I have my people to the left and to the right of me in whom I live in covenant, but it is me that stands before God and must decide and must live into that covenant and must fall down and get up and fall down and get up. It is me that in I think the only good way and the only true way to understand what Calvin was saying way back then. Now, I'm not a Calvinist, you all know that, but the role that Calvin was playing, I think, in the Christian tradition at that time, of having of saying that there's an elect. Well, friends, this is election day, and you have been elected. You're all elected. You, me, every one of us. Elected as saints of God. And so it is our challenge to create times and to pray for times, just the way Paul put to Timothy those nearly 2,000 years ago, where he says, I exhort therefore that, first of all, supplications and prayers and intercessions and giving of thanks be made for all men, and for kings, and for all that are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceful life in all godliness and honesty. Friends, you are a child of God, made in the image of God, part of an elect. Again, not a Calvinist, and that in that, whether you vote today, you don't vote today, I'm less concerned about that. But that you might be reminded that election day is this day in which the world has pivoted to come to understand that truth has lost its fecundity of that old and grand idea that was put out in, I think best modernized in Animal Farm, where that notion that all pigs are equal, but some pigs are more equal than others. That there is a royalty, there are those chosen who are better and wiser and more powerful than you. But you are a child of God, made in the image of God. And you, on this election day, whether you vote or you don't vote, may pray for the kings and for all the authorities, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in godliness and honesty. All right, friends, that's my hope for you today. We'll see who wins this election. It's a barn burner, so we'll pick it up tomorrow with another 11:11. Peace and grace, all.